David Smith here with yet one more Flipped Classroom math lesson. 3 tips before we start. First, you can adjust the playback speed faster or slower to suit your desire. Second, you can pause the video at any point to jot down questions or catch up with your notes. Third, you can turn on the captions so you can read my words on the screen. Today's topic, difference investigation. This is that POW that you've been working on over the last couple weeks in our class. So now it's all coming together and you're looking at this video because you know you need to write a report talking about your investigation and what you learned from it. So this video is designed to walk you through all the things that you need to do well on your report. And what I'm doing is I'm just referring to this grade sheet which has been shared with you. Actually, this is the description of all the sections in your POW, and then on the back is the actual grade sheet that I use when I grade your report. So I think smart students look this over once they think they're finished, just to make sure they didn't miss anything. Okay? All right, so let's get started. So the first section of your report is the introduction. And before I get into that, make sure you put these headings. Again, the headings are right here on the description. So make sure you put those headings in the report. I need to know which section I'm reading as I read through it. Okay, so the introduction. This sets the stage for your report. You want to do a brief overview of your investigation. Like, my partner and I thought that boys like the color red better than girls. Just we had this feeling, and so we wanted to do an investigation to check that out and see if that indeed was true or not. That might be your brief overview. You want to list your hypothesis. And start by just saying your user-friendly hypothesis, like I just mentioned. Like, we think boys like red more than girls. That's the user-friendly version. Then you want to give it in the language that we used in our class that we developed. So, with respect to liking the color red, there is a difference between boys and girls. You also want to list your null hypothesis in the same language. Finally, briefly describe all the things that you did, all the steps that you did. Like, we made our hypothesis, we put it into good language, we wrote an interview script, we asked 68 people our questions, and so on and so forth. All the way through to calculating the probability that the null hypothesis is true. This list shouldn't be super detailed, just list all the things that you do. Okay, the second section is your data. And this kind of goes in 2 places, so pay attention, don't get confused. You're going to write a really short paragraph that's going to summarize your data. So you're going to say something like, well, we interviewed 75 people, 38 of which were girls, the rest were boys, and 47 people answered yes to the question. Now, obviously, you'd be more specific with your report because you know what the question is. You can say more specifically what it is, but you do want a sentence or 2 that just explains the numbers and the data. You can also list any difficulties or anything that you experienced while collecting your data, if you'd like to do that. Now, the second part of your data section are your data collection sheets. And you're going to staple those together and put them at the end of your report, okay? So stick those in the end, kind of like an appendix. And the requirements are that each student has collected at least 25 data points. So your report should have at least 25 data points. You can put all of them in there if you want, but it should have at least 25. And then the total for the entire report has to be at least 50 total, okay? Okay, the third section is calculations and results. And this is where you put the meat of the math and the numbers in your study. So check this out. First, you want to show your data as observed values and your expected values in your 4x4 table. So make sure you did those calculations right, particularly your expecteds. If you need help with that, please reach out. But show this in our 4x4 table. You should be super familiar with constructing that table. Please do that in your report. And like a tip, if you have it and it's nice and neat in your notebook, you can just take a picture of that and paste that into your report. That's fine with me. Or if you want to build the table in your word processor and type the stuff in there, you can certainly do that as well. Just make sure it's your own work, okay? Show the chi-square calculation. So don't just tell me what the chi-square value is. You've got to show that setup with the 4 fractions, just with the plug-in step, crunch the numbers down to their decimals, then add them together and show your chi-square value. Okay, so show that. Next thing, you want to look up your chi-square value in the null hypothesis probability table and state the probability that the null hypothesis is true. Okay, so you want to be sure that you do that. Finally, you want to state whether or not you can reject the null hypothesis. And remember that to reject the null, that means I don't think it's true. You need to have a pretty high probability that the hypothesis itself is true. Okay, section 4, conclusion and summary. And this is where you tell us, or you tell me, exactly what your study says. Okay, so up till now, you've set the stage for what the study is, you talked about your data, you did your calculation, you got your chi-square value, you stated the probability that the null hypothesis is true. Now it's time to wrap that all up and tell us what it means. So the first thing, write a clear conclusion regarding your hypothesis. Something like, we believe our hypothesis is true. We believe our hypothesis is almost certainly true. Our report is inconclusive. Things like that. You really want to make a nice, clear conclusion about your hypothesis, and you want to refer to the probability that the null hypothesis is true. So you could say something like, our report is inconclusive because the probability that the null hypothesis was true is 45%. That leaves a 55% chance the hypothesis is true. So both of those things are almost the same likelihood of being true. That means the report is inconclusive. So you want to tie your conclusion to the probability that the null is true. This is an essential step. You want to use the correct modifier. So if the null is 40% chance of being true and the hypothesis is 60% chance, the hypothesis is more likely true. So that would be more. You can't really say most likely true with those percentages because they're just not strong enough. If it's like 85-15 in favor of the hypothesis, then you could use something like very likely true. If you got a 98% chance that the hypothesis is true, then you can start to go to language like almost certainly true. Remember, you can't be absolutely certain, no matter how high your chi-square value, because there's always going to be some probability that even though your study's pointing towards the hypothesis, that sampling fluctuation happened for you and the hypothesis is actually the truth. The null hypothesis is actually the true thing. So just remember, almost certainly is as far as you can go. Finally, write a quick little short summary sentence that wraps it all up, and then this section is done. Okay, section 5 is the last section of your report. We're almost done. This is the self-assessment. So here's what it needs to go there. First, 2 things that you learned. You worked on this for quite a while, so I'm sure you learned a bunch of stuff. But pick 2 things, perhaps the most important 2, and one of them has to relate to the math. So talk about something to do with the math that you learned on this POW. And the second one, something else. Just something else. We did a lot of stuff. You worked with a partner. You interviewed tons of people. Describe some other thing that you learned while working on this POW. Also, mention a challenge and how you got past it. So maybe your challenge was walking up to juniors and seniors and asking them your survey question. Maybe your challenge was mastering the chi-square calculation. Maybe your challenge was working with a partner. Whatever that was, describe that challenge and how you got past it, or, because sometimes we don't get past our challenges, what you would need to do to get past it if you had that same challenge another time. Okay, so think about that. How could you do better next time? So maybe you did a great job on this POW and you're going to earn an A, and I'm like stoked for that. I'm happy for you. Still, there's always room for improvement as we grow and become better and better in what we do. So look at your work on this one and just think of something that you could do better next time and how you do that. Finally, share your favorite thing. What was the funnest or the most coolest or the most interesting thing about this POW? Share that. Okay, one last point. How to get the best grade. Now, if you know me as a teacher, you know that I'm way more focused on learning than I am on grades. In fact, you've probably heard this before, but if you just focus on mastering the material and learning, the grades will follow. And in fact, that's how to earn the best grade. So don't be overly focused on grades, be focused on learning. However, grades are important, and generating a good transcript helps you get into the colleges that you might want to get into. So even now in this class, it's important to get a good grade. So I want to offer you some tips for that. First one, follow the guidelines. I provide those so you know what my expectations are and so that you know how I'm going to grade you. Second thing, check the guidelines when you think you're done. Many times people think they're done, and if they'd done one last check of the guidelines, they would have figured out that little thing that they forgot and throw that in there and get the points connected to that thing. So check the guidelines when you think you're done. Correct spelling and grammar. Now this is a math class, but this is a writing assignment. So if you have occasional spelling mistakes or your grammar isn't perfect, you're not going to lose points for that. Okay, so I'm not going to deduct you for spelling and grammar alone. However, if there's a lot of problems with spelling and grammar, then your writing won't be clear. And then you will lose points if I can't understand what you're writing. Special note to ESL students. If you have ESL support, then please show a proof of your POW to the person who runs that class and listen carefully to the feedback they give you for making your report really good. Okay? Turn it in on time. Okay? Right now, the deduction for being late is 10%. So if you don't ask for an extension and you don't have your report when it's due, whatever grade you get will be reduced by 10%, which is pretty much a whole letter grade. So just don't go there. Don't have that happen. Finally, make sure you write it in your own words. You are working with a partner, and it's important that you collaborate, that you help each other, that you get through it together. But when it comes time to make your own report, you've got to do all of that yourself, okay? Now that you've watched the video, take a moment to jot down extra notes or jot down some questions for our next class. You can also re-watch portions of the video that you didn't get the first time. If you enjoyed the video, please click like, and if you'd like to help me grow my YouTube channel, please click subscribe.